It's my huge pleasure to introduce Clyde Ellis, who's Professor of History at Elon University. He's a world-renowned scholar on the claims of the histories, and I thought we had him because we both worked on boarding schools, and he published To Change Them Forever, which was one of the books I read and had to taste with. He published that in 1996, and he's also an expert on missions and Christianity and the choice between the Christian road and the Jesus road. He wrote the book, The Jesus Road, Kiowa's Christianity and Indian Hymns, so looking at the singing that goes on in Christian churches. Then he moved on much more into the powwow circuit and dancing people on powwow culture. And the book he's researching now, is sort of running on parallel lines like that, is into hobbyists, and he's looking at people who play in it. And I'm very much hoping that I'm going to be able to tell you that Clyde's going to be a Fulbright scholar at the University of East Anglia next year, so that we have our fingers crossed for that application. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce Clyde Ellis, and if he is able to stay within his 45 minutes, we would really like to invite some questions from the audience to have a bit more give and take. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Clyde so I don't steal any more of his time.
Good afternoon. Okay, it's the after lunch period, no sleeping. Grace, your comment about the couple passing out reminds me of how Kyle was at Rainy Mountain Baptist Church in Southwest Oklahoma. Tell the story of the first generation of Baptist converts. They went to church. One of the first times they heard the Lord's Prayer, when they got to the part where it said, "And give us this day our daily bread," all the Kiowas got up and went out to lunch. I'd like to talk this afternoon about this tradition of show dancing, which has a deep connection to Carlisle. This group called the Carlisle Westerns in a way, but I'm going to cast my net a little bit more broadly and use a number of examples from Southwest Oklahoma, a territory I'm most familiar with. And I want to begin here. In November of 1890, when 80 Lakota Indians, including a number of men in this photograph, convened in Washington, D.C. to challenge the Commissioner of Indian Affairs' recently expressed opinion that dancing in the Wild West was, in the Commissioner's words, a ruinous evil, and that Indians ought to remain at home and engage, he said, in more civilizing avocations. At the heart of the matter was the Commissioner's official opinion that dancing was not only immoral, a word that was used quite often, it contradicted official federal policy. Now, speaking for the truth, Blackheart, second from the left here, in a photo taken on the Mediterranean where Buffalo Bill shows, you know, this is not going to work out for white people. Blackheart said this: "I've been raised on horseback. These men furnish us the same kind of work we were raised to do. That is the reason we want to work for them. White man has the same privilege to work for whatever he wants to do. Any kind of work he wants, he can do it." Rocky Bear, sitting next to him, in a comment that must have been cold comfort to the Commissioner, who demanded that Indians become self-sufficient wage earners, said, in words that were unmistakable, that he already was a wage earner. "This is the way I get money, by dancing in the shows." Between 1880 and about 1930, many thousands, actually, of Native people joined shows, expositions, fairs, and other kinds of entertainment venues to earn a living, dancing, singing, and giving performances. The work put money in their pocket, allowed them to escape the reservation, and rewarded them for portraying what they do best, their own traditional cultures. It also creates a profoundly new kind of public performative presence for Native people. It is very tempting to dismiss a lot of these people as sort of hopping around as some sort of inane minstrel show, being paid a pauper's wage for white audiences who were eager to see the savage Indian. And a lot of observers were correctly appalled by what they sort of saw as this gross exploitation of Native performers. Were some Indians forced into performing because the reservations were horrendously bad? Yes, probably so. There's little doubt. As Rocky Bear put it himself on the reservation, "I am getting poor." Did promoters and owners sometimes use performers crudely and insensitively? No question of that either. As Michael Wallace notes in his work on the Miller Brothers 101 Ranch Real Wild West show, the Miller Brothers intended to use Indian performers as exotic lures to attract large crowds. The ponkas would be put on display, just like prize livestock, award-winning pies and jams, and two-headed snakes and miniature ponies. The payoff was promising. And was the payoff equitable? Almost never. At the same time, the cultural, political, and social and economic reasons that prompted people to join the shows suggest that doing all of this was complicated. If some shows were grossly exploitative, it's also true that dancing for pay was an attractive alternative to the chronic poverty chaos that plagued a lot of reservations. Kill's enemy alone, Alakota, who danced for Cody in 1887, put it this way: I came over here to Europe to see if I could make some money. I see that I can. For a generation of people who know Nicholas Black Elk only as the ultra-conservative traditional icon of John Neihart's famous book, Black Elk Speaks, might be surprised to learn that as a young man, Black Elk wrote that he, quoting here, got disgusted with the wrong road that my people were doing now, so I made up my mind that I was going away to see the white man's ways, and if those ways were better, well, I would like to see my people go that way. Vine Deloria, the late Vine Deloria, whose son Phil will be here later this month, argued that the shows not only gave performers a measure of financial independence, they helped them make informed decisions about the world around them. As an educational device wherein Indians were able to observe American society and draw their own conclusions, he wrote, the Wild West was worth more than every schoolhouse built by the government on any of the reservations. One of Cody's Lakota men put it this way: why do they object to our men seeking money, clothes, and food by doing work with Buffalo Bill that we can do without an effort? Buffalo Bill don't take school children or students for the ministry. He takes men who can ride and shoot. And when they come back, they know as much about the world, and they tell us all about it. In his book on show Indians, L.G. Moses, a dissertation director, I'm required by law to mention him, put it this way: ethnic identity does not have to be preserved through isolation. It can also be preserved and promoted through contact, which strengthens rather than weakens culture. Black Elk again. As I traveled to competitions and toured with the Wild West, word of my healing and prophetic powers would spread. Then people who were doubters would ask me to prove what I could do by telling them my visions and performing my ceremonies for them. That Indians danced at all, and mostly for, and much less for money, had already prompted an intense debate by the 1880s and 90s, more than a decade before this meeting in Washington. The BIA had convened a 50-year campaign to suppress dancing. Sorry, I lost my place, I'm old. And to encourage economic self-sufficiency based on a variety of pursuits, none of which included portraying what the Miller Brothers once described as pure-blooded people of the wild old days who remain strangers to work and who white people want to see perform. The Secretary of the Interior made the case for the anti-dance movement in 1883, where he linked it very clearly to a series of specific ideas and values: debauchery, diabolism, and savagery. 40 years later, they were still at it. Officials wanted Indians to earn their own keep, but according to a very narrow set of cultural markers. A livelihood earned in the shows contradicted the government's assimilation agenda, a point that one commissioner made in 1884 when he wrote that one Indian farmer, like this guy, this is the right image, one Indian farmer will do more to civilize and elevate the race than 100 Indians parading through this country for exhibitions. Some people appealed to moral urgency. The Cheyenne and Arapaho agent in 1909 said that dances were at his place always accompanied by, quoting here, drunkenness, gambling, and other immoral practices. Audiences were thrilled by the Miller Brothers' 101 Ranch Roll by West show, but many policymakers agreed with one critic who said in 1932 that the show was nothing more than raw, unadulterated whorehouse entertainment that deserved to be and was by then out of business. Criticism came from a lot of corners, including Carlisle. Chauncey Yellowroad, a Lakota and a Carlisle graduate, published a scathing indictment of the Wild West in 1914, the menace of the Wild West show, in which he said that he lamented the evil and degrading influence of commercializing the Indian, and he said that the shows were the greatest hindrance, injustice, and detriment to the present progress of the American Indian towards civilization. Show Indians had not merely been taken advantage of, he said. They had been led to the white man's poison cup and had become drunkards. But you know what's complicated? At the end of his life, he put on the wig and the buckskins and acted the part in a Hollywood movie. It's complicated, I think. One of the most revealing attacks came from the superintendent of Indian Education, Daniel Dorchester, who, after witnessing a dance demonstration at the 1893 Columbian Exposition involving these Lakota men, was moved to describe it as the most disgraceful affair he'd ever seen of the most degraded phases of the old Indian life. He grumbled about what he called naked, painted, bedecked Indians in scalp and war dances, and this at the end of the 19th Christian century, quoting here, in a Christian America, in a Christian city, with a full corps of strong policemen, as an entertainment at our great Columbian Exposition for nominally Christian people. Was not the city of Chicago able to prevent so diabolical a spectacle? Was not the management of the World's Fair able to prevent such an infamy? Now, when you went to the fair in those days, the ticket you got to let you in was stamped with one of any number of American historical icons, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln. I hope that the one Dorchester got was this one. So how did we get to the point where official policy could be comfortably ignored, crowds would pay good money to see dancing, and some Indians could make a living by being Indians? One of the most important factors was the ambivalence of official policy. On the one hand, policymakers insist that Indians earn their living by the sweat of their brow and have become agriculturalists. On the other hand, the very same officials routinely approved dance demonstrations in official venues, at World's Fair, at state conventions, at all kinds of centennial exhibits, including, most ironically, I refer to something Jackie showed us this morning, in 1874, while holding these guys prisoner at Fort Marion, Pratt himself authorizes a series of public dances. What's interesting here is that my Kiowa relations say that it's at this dance, the Cheyennes pass to the Kiowa people the bustle, the Pony-Sigh in Clyde, the bundle which becomes the centerpiece of the Oklahoma Society, a still very dynamic dancing society in this day in Oklahoma, in Kiowa circles. So rather than suppressing culture, Cheyennes and Kiowas use this moment to maintain it and to pass it on. And who's sponsoring to the bottom right on the committee? Captain Pratt himself. They do this repeatedly. From the beginning, as a result, officials would then routinely approve dances of some sort as long as companies and agents agreed to treat their Indians fairly, participants avoided torture and sexual conduct, and didn't give all of their money away. Policymakers send mixed messages when they endorse shows of all kinds. The 1893 exhibit that Dorchester saw in Chicago was the officially sanctioned American government exhibit on American Indians, echoed in this case in 1897, the Tennessee Centennial Exhibition. 5 years later, a memo for the Omaha Exposition noted, quote, "It is desirable, of course, that the primitive habits and customs of the tribes be faithfully and fully portrayed in the official exhibit." In 1905, Theodore Roosevelt's inaugural parade invited the Comanche Quanah Parker and the Apache Geronimo, third from the left, Quanah third from the right, from the bottom. Up top in the front row, that it's hard to see, Geronimo is second from the right, Quanah is third from the right. Invited them to participate in the inaugural parade, but only, it said, if they became, quote, fully equipped with Indian clothing as gorgeous as possible in its makeup and complete in its representation of the old Indian dress. You can see why people were confused. Promoters like Cody had long seen the promise of this. The appeal of Plains imagery was especially strong, and he could sell it without any trouble at all. The appeal was so strong, they could pay top dollar for performers who could act the part of Westerners. The perceived primitivism, the exoticism of Indians was especially provocative, and never more so, I would argue, than when they donned dance clothes. In 1899, for example, the proprietor of the White Sulphur Inn in Sulphur Indian Territory wrote to the Kiowa Comanche agents to request, as you can see here, 30 to 50 of the wildest blanket Indians. Let them come down here. We're going to set the beefs loose and let them shoot them and fix them up, just like they did on issue day. We want Indians who will eat raw meat and give them war and ghost dance. If they want to cook the meat, parentheses, we hope they don't, we have a fine barbecue. So let us know what it'll cost us. As all of these people understood, making a living by dancing seemed pretty legitimate to them, and it was absolutely lucrative. If it contradicted the government's notion of proper living, it nonetheless provided gainful employment experience in the wider world, something that performers, entrepreneurs, and agents alike all said lay at the heart of policy. As most observers knew, the government's own plans on the reservation were crashing into a smoking ruin by now. Natives were cash-starved, and dancing for money made perfect sense to these people. Like those the Cheyenne Arapaho Reservation in western Oklahoma, for example, who in 1912 noted to their agent that their lease monies had not been paid for months at a time. "We understand," said one man, "that the government wants us to follow the white man's way. We must have our money to work with." Another man named Hale observed, "We try to do what the commissioner wants us in the direction of farming, and we ought to have our money." A third man named Ute simply noted that a man without a horse cannot plow. A man without money cannot get a horse. It seemed like a pretty clear argument to him. Especially galling was something like the position taken by the Cheyenne Arapaho agent in 1901 when he was disturbed to learn, he said, that quite a number of the Indians of the agency had taken employment with the shows. So he tells the farmer to go out to the districts. Quite a number of the Indians have left their homes to travel different attractions. Some of the Indians have been issued recently wagons, harness, plows, and other agricultural implements. I direct you to take possession of these and send them to the agency, and they will be issued to more deserving Indians. It was pretty clear, I think, that for many Indians, it made more sense to go on the road than it did to sit home and put up with this. It's not surprising that a lot of Indians regarded the shows as a way out of this dilemma. Some may have been attracted by the decent wages Buffalo Bill paid, wrote Rita Napier in a very interesting study of the shows, that could be sent home or used to purchase luxuries, even necessities that no reservation Indian could afford. Moreover, with wages generally at between $25 and $90 a month, the top end meant that performers could earn about half of an annual salary paid to an agency, to the agent at most reservations. Few Indians who took out allotments and farmed the land or ran livestock could have anything like an income approaching that level. Reformers routinely denounced show Indians as being of the worst sort, but was that really worse than staying home and sitting out another South Dakota winter eating spoiled beef? Most Indians said no. One way to discourage dancing for pay was to encourage what seemed to be better alternatives. This was a typical tactic at the annual agency fairs designed to introduce Indians to commerce, industry, and individualism and to discourage dancing and other traditional pursuits. In 1914, the commissioner would ban dancing at these fairs, old-time dances as he put it, but then would turn around and also allow certain dances under some conditions. Officials discouraged dancing, by making sure that it just didn't pay. I want you guys in the cheap seats can see this. This is the payout from 1910 or 11's Cheyenne Arapaho Fair. All the premiums paid for horse races, foot races, contests, bands, and the like came to $1,600. The premiums paid to Indians who danced, $68. Of the total disbursements, $3,800 for the fair that year, less than 2% went to pay for dancing. There's a Carlisle connection here. The Cheyenne Arapaho agent wrote an article in the Red Man in February of 1912 in which he reminded people that the purpose of the fair is twofold. First, to show that the prevailing opinions of the Red Man are as unjust as they are groundless. And second, to stimulate with the Indian such ambitions as will render him more and more efficient from an economic standpoint. The point's not to encourage Cheyenne Arapaho cultural identity, it's to change it. Oop. One way to do it was this. Who wouldn't want to line up for the 50-cent premium for the fourth best behaved baby? Or the $1 premium for the third fattest baby? When this failed, agents simply routinely scolded Indians for going off to the dances, as in 1927, when the Cheyenne Arapaho agent lectured a man named Redbird Scabby about the consequences of what he said had been a very bad and poor arrangement. None of you pay any attention to what you were advised to do. He'd gone off to a show without really crossing the T's and dotting the I's, apparently. And now you find yourself in great difficulty and want the agency to help you out. I hope you have learned a valuable lesson. The thrill of a $1 premium for the fattest baby notwithstanding, people wanted to dance, and audiences were willing to pay for it. Dancing remained as popular as ever. 1902, the Elk City, Oklahoma Record reported on a dance at which 200 Cheyennes gathered. What was new about this was that white people not only paid to see it, they participated in it. Dorchester would have died. It was in 1893, he was disgusted by the fact that he said women had swooned at the sight of dancing Indians. Now, they're paying for the privilege and doing it themselves. And it turned out that there were plenty of paying customers who wanted to see dancing Indians. Dallas State Fair. We'd like to arrange for you a band of Indians to be at our fair. We have a nice grove in which they can camp. Would you please write? They can be secured, and if so, at what cost? Small entrepreneur. Tully Cormack says, I'd like to take a number of Indians through Texas and give the dances. Will it be necessary to have government permission? Well, yeah, but that's easy enough to get before going. And all over the plains, one would see this at regular times, these small-time fairs. This is where most people found themselves performing. This is the Kiowa Comanche Agency. Sometime around the turn of the century, you see these women in the foreground in their shawls, ready to go in. There are hundreds of these. In her very important book, 100 Summers, Candace Green has a wonderful calendar that Kiowas keep, these pictorial calendars. And those calendars depict the single most important moments in each season. Not the most important, the things that are most remembered by the community. And in one of these calendar cells, 1901 or 2, the thing they all remembered most that year, the community agreed was the mnemonic device for that year, was a picture of a fat baby that they had seen at the Anadarko Fair. So this is working its way into people's consciousness, this idea of coming to these public performative fair moments. A typical offer reached the Cheyenne and Arapaho Reservation in 1905 when the Cedar Point Pleasure Resort Company of Sandusky, you couldn't make this up, Sandusky, Ohio, seeking Cheyennes as an educational exhibit. The Ohioans promised what they said would be excellent quarters, the best of care, and expenses to and from their home and board and lodging. Some communities planned ahead. The town of Tonkawa, Oklahoma, informed the Kiowa and Comanche agent in 1901 that it had, quote, subscribed quite a little fund to sponsor an all-Indian entertainment, and it wanted, it said, to attract quite a company of the Apache Indians. They wanted Geronimo, who was in town by then. The town's fair association promised, quote, to care for them, to feed them well, and to furnish pasture for the ponies. The Indians are to receive the gate receipts that will be divided between those who take part. A 1910 request from Thomas, Oklahoma, promised both a high moral tone and a plan to advertise this extensively and making a paying proposition for both the Indians and ourselves. The same year, the Weatherford Commercial Club, Western Oklahoma, guaranteed $750, not an inconsiderable amount of money in 1910, for expenses and premiums for Indian performers at the town's fair. It being understood, it said, that the agent would take proceeds of ticket sales to the Indians. And in return for an Indian moon dance in front of the grandstand, with campfires underlined in the letter, the dancers could charge, they said, and keep an admission fee of 15 cents for any other dance shows they cared to give. It also mattered that well-known Indians joined the shows, for their presence provided a public relations boon and an advertising bonanza that promoters eagerly exploited. As Cody put it to William F. Doc Carver in 1883, I'm trying hard to get old Sitting Bull. If we can manage it, our everlasting fortune is made. Sitting Bull signed on with Cody in June of 85 and quickly became one of the show's most notable attractions and best paid performers. He was guaranteed a salary of $50 a week, 2 weeks' wages in advance, a $125 bonus, free transportation, a retinue of 5 men at $25 a month, 3 women at $15 a month, and an interpreter of his choosing to pay $60. This guy could get after it. He also amassed a considerable pile of money by controlling the rights to his autograph and photos. Robert Utley reports that within 6 months he had earned 3/4 of the annual salary of the agency position. He also gave away much of the money in the form of Lakota generosity to affirm his commitment to Lakota ideals of sharing his bounty with his relatives. So he inverts the meaning of the money and re-signifies what it means to the community in which he lives. Other notables followed, including Geronimo, who informed his agent that he'd be happy to go to the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904 as part of the official exhibit, but not for $15 a month. He had been paid $45 a month to go to Buffalo, and he would take $45 a month to come to St. Louis, and that's what they agreed to. Before long, he signs with Pawnee Bill and is touring the country. Hoping to capitalize on an association with these well-known warriors, this usually couldn't make up. The United States Fidelity and Guarantee Company of Baltimore, Maryland offered to sponsor Geronimo's appearance in St. Louis. The firm's representative in Lawton wrote quite breathlessly, you can see on the right side of the screen here, he has between 85 and 100 scalps to his credit of his savagery, also a vest made of the hair of the whites whom he has killed. Now this is absolute nonsense. But who wouldn't pay to see Geronimo? Everybody would. They also wanted to hire the Comanche Quanah Parker, the most prominent man on the Southern Plains, wealthiest Comanche, and far and away, I would argue, the single most important personality of the Kiowa Comanche Agency in the first part of the 20th century. Promoters knew a good thing when they saw it. Geronimo was especially in high demand. In 1905, maybe you've seen this picture. It's not a Cadillac, it's a locomobile. Just saying. This is the famous, you've also seen the photos taken after this where he kills the buffalo. This is the moment when he does. He shoots from the seat of the car and kills the buffalo with arrows. The Miller brothers hired him to do this as part of the 101 Ranch Show. As part of this weekend, the Miller brothers also offer $1,000 in cash to anyone willing to be scalped alive by Geronimo. Hold on, here's the good part. Somebody said yes. Alas, he was not there at the appointed time. I bet Geronimo still got paid. I'm just saying. The best he drank, by the way, the man to his left is Evan LeClaire, a Ponca man when he performed the shows. Geronimo so admired the vest, LeClaire gave it to him. Geronimo was buried in it there at Fort Sill. The most lucrative opportunities came from the larger shows and combinations that flourished between 1880 and the First World War. In the agency files of every agency in the country, there are, I kid you not, files labeled dances, shows, and fairs and exhibitions, running to the many hundreds of pages, a testament to what a big deal this was. With nearly 100 shows on the road at the turn of the century, opportunities for employment were generally good, and it shows had little trouble filling their needs. Now, Grace said earlier, did you know there was more than Buffalo Bill? In the files of the Kiowa Comanche Agency alone, this is the lineup that I found. Pawnee Bill, Buffalo Bill, the two Bills when they get together, Comanche Bill, Tiger Bill, Indian Bill, Oklahoma Bill, Texas Bill, Pecos Bill, Cheyenne Bill, Texas Nell, Texas Ted, Texas Tom, Texas Bud, Texas Jack, Montana Frank, Texas Charlie, California Frank, Bronco John, Bronco Bill, Buckskin Ben, full title of the show, Wild West and Dog and Pony Show, Diamond Dick, Cherokee Ed, Captain Ed, Colonel Tim McCoy, the Dallas State Fair, the Louisiana Purchase Centennial, the Muskogee Indian International Fair, the Craterville Fair, the American Indian Exposition, M.L. Clark, the Sells Brothers, the Worth Brothers, and the Miller Brothers. And as the student once told me, and a partridge in a pear tree, apparently. There are, in fact, the list runs to more than 150 circuses, which are hiring people to dance in this time. The giants of the business, Cody and the Miller Brothers 101, for example, held auditions on reservations that attracted large numbers of performers in search of a contract and offered cash bonuses for the best outfits and the most talented dancers. Pay for performances varied widely. On the lower end, it was about $12 a month. And on the upper end, that's for room and board and for your wages. This man offered to pay Indians $12 a month for a regular series of dances and baseball games. So it's not just dancing. At the other end, Cody paid quite well. This is Rocky Bear's contract from 18, is there a date on this? I thought I had one. It's $75 a month, which exceeds the industrial wage of most people in Manhattan at this period. Generally speaking, full-time adult employees is expected to earn roughly $1 a day, plus food, lodging, and medical care. In 1903, a Cheyenne named D. Bigman reported that Indian performers with the Kennedy Brothers, Indian Congress, Wild West, and Hippodrome were earning $5 a week. He earned $7 a week as an interpreter and reported that the show's owners, quote, give us anything we need. In 1906, the 101 paid salaries that ranged from $5 cash per week for a man to $4 cash on average for women. Women tended to earn about half of what men did. The 101s above the scale. Federal regulators obliged owners to provide contracts, cover travel, food, and medical costs, but they also required dancers to provide their own outfits. During most of its history, for example, the 101 required performers to provide, quote, one set of Indian clothes, headdress, and moccasins. And in 1910, Joe Miller specified that Indian men were to be, quote, as nearly as possible long-haired or to have good wigs and good costumes. Those who could meet the requirements, he said, would earn $5 a week as regular Indians. Comments from Indians working in the show suggest a wide variety of experiences, some of them positive, some of them positively glowing. Luther Standing Bear, who we've already heard about, wrote that Cody's show provided him, his wife, and his newborn daughter, Alexandra Birmingham Cody Standing Bear, born in England during the show, with a standard of living they could never have earned at home on the reservation. Carlisle graduate Standing Bear later will remember that the decision to put the newborn daughter on display during the 1903 tour in England was, quote, a great drawing card. The work was light for my wife, and as for the baby, before she was 24 hours old, she made more money than my wife and I put together. Others expressed similar appreciation for the chance. I don't know if I was at home, I would not do anything, wrote D. Big Man in 1903, because there is no work at home for me to do. They were dancing twice a day, he wrote, adding, we are doing well and making money. Julia Roy Ponca from Oklahoma, working for the 101 in 1914, wrote, everything is as pleasant as it needs to be or can be. It is too cold. She was in New York City. But at the same time, it is very nice to get out and travel a little bit and see something of the world. We've already heard from Grace about Richard Davis, who wrote to say that if the 101 boys wanted two of their favorite and loyal performers, all they need to do is ask. So they did. I don't know if you heard what Grace said. In fact, the brothers hired them. This is Walter Batiste, Hampton on the left, 101 show on the right. He docked their pay $10 a month because they were so fat they couldn't sit their ponies. James Pulliam in Oglala with 101 and formed the Pine Ridge Age in 1921. I like it here just fine. And if I had to pay for what I've seen so far, I'd be broke for the rest of my life. Along with 4 other associates from Pine Ridge, he saved enough money from the show to buy a Model A Ford and drive it home to South Dakota once the tour was over. Some performers lived hand to mouth on wages that barely kept them afloat. In 1907, a performer named High Chief implored his agent at the Cheyenne and Arapaho Reservation to forward lease payments as soon as possible. I get $8 per week, my wife $3, and the children $1 each, but it's not enough to provide for our needs. Willard High Chief, also with the 101, in Suffolk, Virginia in 1914, writes home to plead for assistance on the grounds, as you see here, I am awful sick and would like to get my mother's lease money so I can go back there right away. The wild horse threw me off, got hurt bad, didn't pay me for it, so please send me the money, I need it bad, from Willard High Chief at the 101 Ranch show. The agent sent, the agent, I'm way ahead of schedule. I got more, I'll just slow down. The agent wired $50 immediately. Others weren't so lucky. In 1915, officials at the same agency, Cheyenne Arapaho Reservation, refused a request for release funds because they did not believe the couple requesting the payment really needed it. He is getting $25 a month already, wrote the agency farmer, and his wife $12.50, and all their expenses. So I see no reason why he should need his money, and I think that it would be a good idea to save the $20 a month until he comes home, as he would probably spend it all if it was sent to him, which I think is sort of the point, isn't it? Some show Indians were simply abandoned. There are dozens of these kinds of telegrams in the agency files of most large agencies on the Southern Plains. In this case, a 1923 telegram from Dallas to Darlington and Cheyenne Arapaho saying that they had simply been left and not quite sure what to do with them. Performers and their families also suffered unanticipated setbacks, as when the Miller brothers pressed a claim for expenses associated with the death of one of their Indian employees, a young boy who had died during the 1907 tour, a great tragedy. We had his body embalmed and paid his expressage back to the agency, which was $180. As he no doubt lives in the state, I presume the amount will be reimbursed to us. This is the same fare that 6 years later paid the great white coat world boxing champions Jess Willard $100,000 to put on boxing exhibitions. I don't know how we square that, really. Willard also had a private car, a chef, and a driver. They paid him $100,000 to box, and they pressed this couple for $180 to pay for the funeral expenses of their dead son. Not everybody suffered this. Cody was better than most. When one of his performers died of tetanus in 1891, he promptly sent the widow $500 cash, plus the dead man's back wages of $100, and agreed to pay the widow $25 a month for the rest of her life. Cody was, by many standards, more understanding and sympathetic than most of his fellow show owners. In the end, see how we have time? Yes! There's going to be a test. Just saying. Between 1880 and about 1920, 1930, show dancing became a new kind of cultural expression in Indian country. It was economically significant. It was also deeply culturally significant. It was entertainment for many people. It was also an intensely important and increasingly meaningful form of cultural expression for Indian people. It was complicated by the tensions of performers versus audiences. There's no question of this. And working as a performer was not simply good or bad, not entirely enjoyable or entirely distasteful. Life as a show Indian was not always what people had hoped it would be. And many of them nonetheless earned a living in which they could take inordinate pride at a time when other opportunities were severely limited. I agree with George Moses, who says the way to understand these people is not to see them simply as pawns and victims in some lowbrow roadshow tradition that emerges in the 1920s, although there is plenty of this. The reverse is also true. If we understand Native people to have been aware of and understanding of the social and cultural and political implications of what they were doing, as I think we must, then the participation in the shows, I think, takes on, as Moses argues, a much more complicated hue. Many of them earned a living in which they took pride, in which they could achieve a measure of financial gain that they couldn't get anywhere else, often according to the only avenue open to them, as entertainers, as in the case of the Pawnee, Oklahoma 1929 tribal dance team, which performed, as the caption says here, for thousands of people at a time. It also had profound implications for the emergence of a new public performative dance tradition, which coalesces in the 1930s and 40s into what we now call broadly the powwow world. It begins in many different ways. Powwow culture is not the child of one source. It is influenced by many different threads of activity and influence. This is one of them. There is not a powwow in the world today worth its salt without a grand entry. Grand entry is adopted from the Wild West. Some of the protocol of these powwow structures are also influenced by these early entertainment things. The idea that Cody and the Miller brothers, for example, paid dancers for contests is, in some people's minds, the beginning of the contest mania, which by the late 20th century sort of starts to run out of control in some people's minds. The idea of a public performative venue is not entirely new. There's plenty of evidence in the pre-reservation age, as we see things like ledger art, Jackie, in which we know that people are dancing in order to present stories about themselves. This is new in a way, though. It concentrates that meaning in a way we haven't seen before. So the connection between this moment and the moment that we now understand in the early 21st century as is intensely traditional and unquestionably legitimate expression in the powwow world is pretty clear. Now there's more to it than this, but there's clearly this connection. I don't want to minimize the risks or to downplay the problems. I want to suggest that we should seek to understand both the economic incentives and the drawbacks of the shows as complicated negotiations and decisions in which Indians and whites alike played a pivotal role. In the end, we're left with owners like the Millers, who pitched a family for funeral funds, or Cody, who promised to do as well as he could, or performers who found a new life and a sense of legitimacy out in the public performative arena. The hand-to-mouth life of Lillard High Chief, the young man whose injuries from being thrown off a horse forced him to plead for $50, was set against the bounty that others reap as Wild West performers. Indians who went on strike because they objected to manual labor, it was beneath them, they said, were joined by those like Henry Pahoxco, who wrote to tell the Kiowa Comanche agent in 1906, quote, "We are getting along very nicely with this show. And with the exception of the 3 Comanche boys who had to leave because the owner wouldn't let them go to the saloons, we've been having a right good time." Thank you. 5 minutes, she says. Okay, good. Any questions?
Yeah, we've got 5 minutes for questions. 5 minutes. Yeah.
Why do you think Cody was so lenient, so benevolent toward the Indians as opposed to the others?
I think part of it, he has a long association with, two things. He has a long association with Indian people. Cody is in many ways, he's the real thing. And he's not making this up. He lived the life of a frontier scout. And he understands in a way that I think a lot of showmen don't, what it means to be a part of this world. On the other hand, as Joy Casson and others have made clear, he was down to the tips of his toenails, a really fine performer. And early in life, by 1876, he's going into the field after the Custer battle wearing a theatrical costume in the battle with the Cheyennes in the first major engagement after Little Bighorn. And he takes a scalp, he shows it on the stage, he wears the costume he had in the field that day. He has this sort of preternatural appreciation for the performative value of the West. He joins us in a third way to this idea of telling a kind of story about America that on the one hand is triumphant. I mean, white people are going to win. But which accords Indian people an important role. Now that role is to disappear, but he sees this as a formative moment in American history. I mean, one of the reasons why they get stuck in the past tense is the Wild West. It's such a persuasive model. So he's got some things going for him, I think, intellectually and personally, and in terms of his sort of the world he lives in his head for show business, that sets him apart from the others. And what the Miller brothers have going for them are unbelievably deep pockets. I mean, they're the richest people on the Southern Plains, and not so great at understanding Indians in every way. Debbie?
I just wanted to ask him too, don't you think that he really mobilized public relations with Bunline and all those?
Oh, I do, yeah, he's a great publicist.
He just was the avant-garde. He
He's-
cut it and he did all
Yeah,
the-
he really gets it. He hires Arizona John Burke to sell the show. The next thing you know, he's in London, he's in Rome, he's going to all the capitals of the world. I mean, it's a sort of a missionary effort for him.
Yeah, it's sort of like inventing the internet.
He makes $1 million in 1894-5. This is stunning. And then he goes broke. He's a terrible businessman.
Yeah.
He's terrible. He ends up broke.
He tried to go to the movies.
All right, one more.
I was wondering, since it's a very deep and historical cultural value of the Indian population, what was the resistance maybe from the Indian population at large in terms of commercializing something that's very dear and deep to them?
Good question. I mean, some people regard this as sort of culture-like in some ways, right? And is it a sellout? I don't think it is, because this is not an either-or proposition. Assimilation is not what happens on the reservations. We often don't see it because it's not, we usually don't see what we're not looking for. But in community after community, these dancing traditions are maintained. Now they're modified. It's clear. I mean, people modify dances all the time to stay out of harm's way. So what happens here is a dual development. So there's these traditional gatherings, they continue to occur all across Indian country. They're changed in order to avoid the worst of the pressures, to get out of the way of the agents who are going to put people in jail for dancing and cutting off their rations. But the fact of the matter is, people continue to dance. So at one and the same time, Black Elk talks about this. They choose which dances to perform for Buffalo Bill, he says. And so they create, literally, this sort of new secularized version in some ways of a public performative society dance, the Omaha dance in their hands, that becomes widely shared across the plains. Back home, the same people are also performing these important dances. If you go today to the Kiowa Omaha ceremonials, in the afternoon, it's all Omaha ceremonial. At the night, it's all powwow. It's the same people, it's the same clothes. The songs are different. Songs tell you what's going on. But it looks like the same thing, so it's confusing, right? But I would argue, it's not my idea, Eric Lasser comes up with this, is that we have this multiple tracks developing of dance culture. One more?
Look, I was going to say, I think we're going to have to close it down. Thank Clyde very much, but there will be